and welcome to UC Today. My name is Kristian and today's session is how to use modern IP solutions to stay compliant with public safety laws. And joining me to tell me all about it is Ryan Zoehner, CEO at Algo. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, what are the most significant challenges organizations face when using communication systems to comply with these new safety laws like Alyssa's law in the US and Martin's law in the UK?
Yeah, great question. And maybe I can start. I could just introduce these laws a little bit to make sure everyone is clear on these. Around the world, we're seeing new regulatory frameworks get put in place. You mentioned Alyssa's law. You mentioned Martin's law. That's an example out of the US, an example out of the UK. But these regulatory frameworks often have a lot of commonalities in them, and they're essentially challenging public organizations to have critical and rapid communication response plans to deal with incidents. Alyssa's law is a law that is focused on the education sector in the US. It's been approved in 9 states. It's pending in 18. So it's becoming ubiquitous across most states within the US. Martin's law, on the other hand, also requires a risk assessment and communication plans for public venues. So common challenges, common regulatory constraints, different environments. So to go to your question and address, what challenges are organizations facing, I'm going to break that into 2 areas. I think it really comes down into planning and into technical challenges. The first challenge organizations see is what are these regulations? These regulations get published, organizations need to comply, the text to read them is not always as simple as you might hope, and so they need to assess what that looks like. Really where it starts for these organizations is doing some internal reflection and understanding what are the unique needs of their organization. No 2 schools are the same, no 2 public venues are the same. There's a need to kind of look at that, assess that, understand that. But the challenge is there's no open playbook. And so we often see organizations looking to figure out where they may be able to address that. And there are many partners who can help. There are, of course, installation partners and partners who have been doing this for many organizations that have seen challenges and opportunities. There are partners like us, manufacturers, that are working with these challenges every day. But there's some great nonprofits as well that really focus on these spaces and bringing excellent education to the table. There's a group we work with in the US called the I Love You Guys Foundation. They have excellent third-party standard protocols, and it's a great place for organizations to start. So that's really on the planning side, is like, where do we start assessing your organization, and wherever possible, go find that third party who's an expert in the space. Now, the technical challenges is where that ultimately ends up. And it usually comes down to a question of, do you have foundational technology that you can build upon and scale upon to address these compliance requirements? And usually, if you have a modern IP-based communication system, you can address that by scaling on smart solutions. But organizations that exist within legacy infrastructure may be a little bit more challenging. So we find organizations really having to evaluate their technology stack, understanding what they can add, and then really kind of build upon from there.
Excellent. Well, a lot of these venues and schools probably have like an internal TANI system. Why are these legacy communication systems no longer fit according to these new regulations?
Yeah, and I'll stress a couple things. I mean, in certain cases they can. In certain cases, the legacy solutions that are typically analog and non-IP may be suitable and effective. In many cases, they may not. So that's where that internal reflection, looking at your technology, is the first step to make sure there is something net new that's needed. But the first case, and while they'll usually fall short, is the need for connectivity. If we talk Alyssa's law specifically, there is the need with Alyssa's law to have panic buttons that directly connect to 911 or emergency responders. In this case, local on-premise systems obviously don't have connectivity to the external world, and that's going to be a shortcoming. In Martin's law, there's the ability to effectively communicate across large venues and communicate with emergency responders, but potentially with managers of the facility. And so the ability to make that happen with legacy systems can be challenging. So that lack of interoperability and connectivity is really the first shortcoming that may be a challenge. The second challenge is going to be more on a capability set. Historically, these legacy systems are one-way broadcast systems. that can issue messages but are not a dynamic tool to adapt to the environment. And I'll give you a couple examples on that. Simple solutions like that, like modern IP speakers and modern IP tools, can dynamically adjust their environment, get louder, get quieter. That allows you to have robust feature sets on that. Modern IP systems allow you to use infrastructure for more than just its day-to-day purpose. A speaker that has a microphone in it can go from being a broadcast speaker to a two-way communication solution in a classroom. So you can build a strong feature set around these IP tools that maybe doesn't exist in the legacy. But I would argue the most important item is the third, and that's supervision and proactive maintenance of these solutions. So with a legacy system, you only know that the system isn't going to work when you test it and try to use it. And unfortunately, that can be discovered too late. With a modern IP system, it gives you the ability to proactively manage, monitor, check, run health checks on your system, perform routine assessment, and ensure at all points in time that all devices are functional, online, active. That supervision, we think, is really, really, really important to making sure that your emergency communication system isn't just there, but you know it's there and it's functional.
Okay, excellent. Well, how do UC solutions provide a foundation for this new real-time alerting and coordination requirements of some of these new laws?
Yeah, well, I think you have a couple challenges in trying to meet these, and we've talked about that a little bit, but the unified communication systems are often already there, in place, and functional. And I think that's really important because it's the tool that many occupants of the building are comfortable using. Whether that's an administrator in a school office that is used to using that for their day-to-day voice paging, phone calls, bells, messaging, or whether that's in a public venue where someone's using it for all of their internal communication. It's the front-end experience that someone is used to picking up that application and opening up a Microsoft Teams application or a Zoom application or another unified communication platform. By leveraging that as your emergency communication front door, it allows you to use a tool that people are already comfortable with, already familiar with, they know where to go, and you can add on to it. So for user training, functionality, adaptability, it's so much easier to build upon that. The next thing that you have there is that by leveraging these modern communication systems, they are already building in that connectivity that I talked about with the challenges of the legacy systems. If you need to integrate with external parties, if you need to integrate with first responders, you have the ability to leverage that connection that already exists and is already there. And then the third piece is that much of the hardware that is built around that legacy, that modern communication system, that is being used for day-to-day operational needs. IP phones sitting on desks, DECT phones in warehouses and public environments, speakers in classrooms and hallways. That operational technology can be turned to become emergency messaging very, very quickly, very, very effectively, and built upon it. So it's easy to turn on, it's easy to adopt, and you're going to get users that know how to leverage these tools much easier than building an independent, entirely different system.
Fascinating. Well, what are some of the best practices for integrating these UC solutions into existing safety protocols to ensure compliance? And equally, what about augmenting legacy systems v transitioning to a fully IP-based system? What would you say is some of the bonuses of integration, and what is the bonus of fully transitioning to a new system?
Sure. So let me answer the second one, and I'll come back to best practices because I think that is a challenge a lot of organizations face, right? Many organizations have existing infrastructure. It may be legacy infrastructure, and there's a desire to leverage much of that and say, hey, can we integrate our existing infrastructure with a modern IP tool? And the answer of can you integrate is almost always yes. You can tie that solution together, and there are going to be smart ways to meet the compliance needs of the requirements of that building. Whether that's going to be the best solution is going to be a question of that specific environment. So it is going to be easy for you to integrate legacy infrastructure and create one-way communication, one-way broadcasting, build in triggers and alerts. You, of course, would lose much of what I just talked about on supervision and the criticality of that, as the legacy infrastructure is going to become analog at some point and you cannot supervise and remotely manage that. You are also going to lose some of the robust feature sets But what we often see organizations choose to do is build hybrid systems and identify across their facility there are areas where the legacy infrastructure is absolutely suitable, and you will use smart adapters and bridges to connect that legacy infrastructure into a modern UC communication solution. And then there's going to be other areas of the building where that legacy infrastructure is not suitable, is not enough. And organizations will then rip that out and replace that with IP solutions that are. And that hybrid model is very, very common. That hybrid model, when done the right way, is often a great solution, done based on a risk assessment across the organization, understanding the unique needs of each area of your facility, addressing what the real requirements are, and then being honest and pragmatic about whether you need to invest in something new or whether you can bring and scale it along. So there are nuances here, and this all comes down to looking at your environment, understanding and assessing it. But on average, what we see is that many organizations fall short in certain areas of their building if they stay full legacy solutions. But there are often smart and creative ways to leave legacy solutions in some parts of the facility and go IP in others. And that's a very reasonable path forward. To come back to the first part of your question, you asked about the framework for how do we address like best practices and how do we approach that. And for us at Algo, we typically take a very simple framework to this. And it really starts with that understanding that I've alluded to a couple times is understand the legislation, those regulations that have been put in place, and understand your facility's need. Match the uniqueness of the law to the uniqueness of your facility. The next would be referring to any expert guidance that exists out there. I mentioned previously an organization called the I Love You Guys Foundation. There are other organizations like this that put in great protocols that have seen hundreds or thousands of organizations go through this challenge and have advice for how to do that. So that's usually where we say, get that expert advice. The next thing is evaluating your current tech stack and understanding, can you leverage what you have? Where may you need to replace, continue with, or augment your solutions? And in doing that, choose tools wherever possible that extend the user experience of people in your building. If people are already comfortable going to an IP phone on a desk, leverage that. If people are already comfortable using a soft client for their UC platform, leverage that. That's what's going to allow you to have the best use, the best activity. The next thing is really, really important is as you're going to modern IP-based systems, ensure that your systems have local on-site redundancy. Critical best practice, making sure that you have not only the cloud-based solution, but local on-site redundant solutions. And there's really easy and really effective ways to put that into place, leveraging local networks on backward power with local on-site multicast or other communication protocols. Very simple, very effective. And then the final piece is about training staff and making sure that the users in that facility know how to use the tool. I've alluded to this multiple times. If it's a tool they already use, we find that training is much, much, much lighter. But really that familiarity is going to build confidence over time and make sure everyone on site, on staff is trained in how to use these tools.
Okay, excellent. Well, some of this conversation regarding upgrading legacy versus fully transition to an IP-based system is largely around cost. So I was wondering, how can organizations ensure their system that they're now using remains flexible and scalable as legislation like Alyssa's law begins to roll out in more states and perhaps gets more things added or more requirements tagged on?
Yeah, I mean that's probably the best part about leveraging a modern, IP-based UC system is that it has the ability to be scalable, and it really starts with that, I'd say, the right foundation. If you build on a system that's IP native, if you build on a system that's open standard, if you build on a system that's cloud manageable, these are all things that are going to allow you to effectively scale, add on, and build around. We find that by choosing that right foundation, if the regulations change and you need to complement and add in a few more pieces, it's as simple as dropping in a little bit more hardware, a little more software, and you can really, really add that on. Where organizations run into challenges, you build things that are closed systems, you build things that are closed off, and then your options become so much more limited and you're really kind of closed in on that. So we encourage organizations to leverage industry standards, buy open solutions, invest in technology that is known and trusted, and then you can adapt as the laws change. Fortunately, I would say the core of these laws are very, very common and consistent, effective communication to meet the needs of the facility, and the changes should be minor. So if you've built that right foundation, any of the changes should be simple add-ons.
Excellent. And finally, As more IP systems are introduced in schools, or schools and venues, how do you see the UC usage of these organizations changing as more things are connected and more things can communicate to their overarching communication architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bigger trend that you're seeing across every organization is that organizations aren't looking to add more systems. Organizations are looking to get more out of the systems that they have. And I think that is true of unified communications. I think that is true when it comes to these public safety activities. These are excellent, robust, reliable systems. And we think organizations will continue to lean on their UC to be a bigger part of not just their day-to-day communication, but critical life safety communications. And more organizations will shift into building and building around these systems. They can become the anchor point for safety, not just the anchor point for video calls and messaging. And with smart add-ons like Algo devices and other software, it becomes very easy to scale up and build that up. So we see unified communications moving more into core infrastructure, the unified communications being used in more ways, ultimately leading down the direction that organizations don't want to have thousands of systems. They want fewer systems that are used well and understood by everybody.
Excellent. I think that's a great place to end it. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
And thanks to the audience for watching. If you've enjoyed this, don't forget to like and comment on the video and subscribe to stay in the loop with all our latest videos. Until next time, we'll see you then.